Maker, work at admin, please unmute yourself and share that. And then finally, I encourage you all to connect with one another. So let's just create a network of support. So if there's any other insights that you have or anything that you'd like to know, again, we'll have some prompts in order to leverage that. So we just don't become some strange little humans in these little tiles. Does that sound okay with everyone? All right. If you've been drinking some water, or coffee, or tea, whatever you're doing, I encourage you to feel as refreshed and hydrated as you can. So
I'm making my tea, okay?
all right, you're the best, Linda. Let me share my screen and let's get this party started. So, give me 1 second here.
So while Jamie, while you're setting that up, I'm just going to do a couple of housekeeping things real fast. So hi, everybody. Good morning and welcome to the Supporting Students Through Social Emotional Online. My name is Rebecca Floyd and I am going to be your room monitor. So if you have, I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to dump them in there. And then this workshop is also being recorded. And I will, at 55 minutes, I'll go ahead and put the workshop evaluation link in the chat. And Jamie, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
All right, lots of love, everyone. All right, let me first give you the deck. So if you're want to follow along, you can. I encourage you to use all the resources. They're completely free. So whatever it is that we go through, please, I encourage you to follow along and embrace it all. All right, let's get started. So my name is Jamie Nunez, and I have for probably about 17 years of my life tried to understand how our kids learn and engage in online spaces, how we validate their identities and what they're trying to tell us by the fact that they're posting something, whether it's on Facebook when I started looking at this, or as it's now being presented on TikTok or even parts of WeChat. So part of my interest personally and professionally has always been, how do I bring that world into learning? So as a former high school teacher and a vice principal and even like an after school program director, I've always tried to incorporate that. So I have that type of lens. I also not recently now, it seems like forever, but I have now entered the lens as a parent. So as a father of a 5-year-old girl, I now recognize the tension that exists for my daughter's interest in technology and how she wants to express herself in that particular space. So I sort of carry that with me as well. Today, as I noted, we're going to be addressing the social and emotional lives of our kids online. What exactly is happening to them, both from a really challenging standpoint to their own resilience, and what can we do to interrupt that? And I want to kind of let you know who we are for a second. So we are the leading nonprofit. Common Sense has dedicated the last 15 years of its existence to understand this digital space and support families and educators to navigate these spaces. And so, as you might imagine, since March, we've had such a crazy workload, but part of the support that we offer our million plus educators that use our content is we have a free lesson platform. It's our digital citizenship or wellness lesson, essentially free lesson for educators. We also review ed tech tools. So if you want to know more about Instagram or want to know anything about Minecraft, we kind of have the insight on what's like and how it can benefit or how it hinders growth and development. And then finally, we've started back in March a platform called Wide Open Schools, where we partnered with folks like National Geographic or Apple to bring about resources for families. So again, these resources are all free. If you are interested on this particular link, this particular slide, you can click on the image and start an account if you have not done so. I encourage you to do that to follow along. All right, let's start. Let's embrace our presence. So today is a little different. I'm going to welcome you all in a second. We're going to take a moment to do something slightly different than we did yesterday as a session. What I want you to do is I want you to put whatever you're thinking away for a second, and I want you to focus on one other person. And I don't want you to stare at them. I just want you to look at them for a second. And then I want you to notice something about them, something different, something unique, something positive about them. You might notice Candace's beautiful glasses, or you might notice Angela's sort of nice calendar in the background. But I want you to take a moment to just observe someone for a few seconds. And then on the chat, I want you to have a dialogue with that person. We're going to start with something really simple. We're going to acknowledge that they exist, that we're not just tiles that are moving in this strange place. And then I want you to think about the compliments you want to give. The deeper, obviously, the better. It's kind of hard to do that. So I'm going to ask you to be a little bit vulnerable, but I'm going to ask you to acknowledge each other's presence. Does that sound all right? So I'm going to model for you for a second. Eunice Navidad, I so appreciate the beautiful blue top that you have going on there. It complements your skin complexion very well, right? And Adrienne, I really like the fact that your the lipstick that you're wearing really complements the rings that you have. I wish I could wear lipstick. Like these are the things I want to kind of acknowledge, right? So take a moment now, find somebody on the tile and acknowledge their presence on the chat. So again, nothing funny, everyone. No voyeuristic comments here, just some authentic compliments. Okay, take a moment now and do that. And if you're not on the camera, it's okay. Maybe we can compliment each other's names and validate each other's names. So, and if you'd like to be on, feel free to unmute yourself. And as you're doing that, if you want to feel validated, like, hey, no one's choosing me, then go ahead and put your hand up, right? So, or not your hand up, but maybe you want to say on the comment, hey, everyone, I'm feeling like I need to be validated. You might say, Jamie, how dare you even ask me to do that? But we're going to be honest with each other, okay? All right. Lots of love, you all. I encourage you to continue to do that. Linda, love your smile as well. Always love that. All right, right. We don't need to let the toxic world of our outside sort of have that hinder our connection that we're going to build together, right? So if you still want to feel validated at any point, unmute yourself and say like, Jamie, I didn't get called on. Would you mind giving me a compliment? Or if you want to give more because you're feeling the extra love for one another, go ahead and do that throughout the session. We're going to normalize that. So what did I just do in a second, right? Not only do I want to build a connection with you, I want to model what it's like to name two things for us. One is, this is strange. This world is a strange place, right? And for our kids, it's even more challenging, right? That they have to show up and feel curate their own identity before they even step in. And I think as adults, we owe it to them to not normalize it, but to name the fact that this is a strange time in our lives and to still let them know that we care about them, right? That's the number one thing we're trying to do. And so today, if you woke up before you came in here, you felt like, get the session over with. We're going to center you so we can think about what we're really trying to do here as humans. Sound okay? And get a little love? All right, let's enjoy it. All right, what we're trying to do, here are the sort of three takeaways that I encourage you to think about. Today, we're going to talk about your stressors. What are the stressors that our kids are grappling with? How do they manifest themselves on Zoom calls? What do they actually look like? So we're going to be comfortable in identifying them. I'm going to turn to you all at some point to ask you if you have any additional stressors, but these are the things that we're seeing at Common Sense across the country that our kids are actually facing. The second point, I think, as a takeaway is really understanding that these dilemmas, while they're really complex, so-and-so said this to so-and-so, and as a result created this reaction, and now it's creating a ripple effect. These are very complex in nature, but our support for how we address them should never be, right? They should be very clear and they should be modeled all the time in front of our kids so they know what to turn to or who to turn to and what to say related to them. The third thing is we want to introduce language and experiences that actually highlight students. And so I started my session off with creating an experience for us all that some of you are like, why did you do that, Jamie? I'm not in like group therapy. And others might actually feel like this is an interesting time, right? So this is an experience that I want to own and create, but at least I want to name. I want to encourage you all to introduce the type of language, whether you work directly with kids or you work at an admin office, directly in setting up policies that support this type of initiative. All right, let's name the elephant really quickly. I promise I'm not going to take it too negative. Distance learning is extremely challenging, right? Being online is very grappling for kids and families. We're seeing the persistent screen time leading to an increase in an uptick in irritability. After the 5th hour, if you're like, I'm still on a Zoom call, those for kids are difficult to define. We see that too many tech tasks can actually create apathy for families. So if it's like, go to this tool and then go to this tool, and then don't forget to access this, and then here's our page long of resources, eventually we stop seeing clicks, right? You can kind of notice that if you subscribe to email list, at some point you just kind of stop reading them. And then the key in all this is like, do our kids know where to turn to when something is actually not going right? Or do they know when to turn to when ... Is there a very simple pathway? What we're finding at Common Sense is that no, it's very disjointed, that schools and after school programs are creating experiences that don't centralize information as much. And what we noticed more so than ever, we did a study back in late April about how our kids are feeling about the pandemic. And I would imagine that it would probably be magnified at this point. But what we found is that in the 2,000 plus kids that we interviewed that took a survey, what we found is that our kids are increasingly going to and seeking information related to mental health. And so that tells me that our kids are not only feeling fatigued, that they are also trying to understand whether or not it's actually right for them. Now you might be saying, no, duh, Jamie, like I'm seeing this every day. Like you don't need to put it on a slide, but I assure you there's a point to all this, right? And that's the idea that all this leads to thinking about what the root of all this is. And as we think about stressors, there's a huge connection between the two, which is that these stressors are rooted in something. And since this started, we can kind of identify these three core buckets, right? That we want to start to understand sort of the nuance of it. The first is our kids are lacking shared experiences. So if Lily Fuentes and I were hanging out before all this pandemic and all of a sudden we just have to see each other from an interesting screen, I have a really hard time sharing an experience with her than I would otherwise, right? For many of our kids, social media, particular adolescents, is increasing to isolation. So that the more maybe Adrian and I have a connection, the less I feel connected to her, and therefore I'm feeling a little bit more recluse. I don't feel the need that I can actually build upon that. Therefore, it's leading me to feel isolated or feeling disconnected. So kids are both physically feeling that isolation as well as mentally feeling like they can't connect. And finally, I mean, for many of our kids, the fact that they got to redefine what friendship means to them is very real and very raw for all of us. Right. So again, if Timothy Aguilar and if I had a beard and our friendship was based on the fact that my beard and his were like as smooth as his was, then I would say that it is very nice. And I wish I could grow one very smooth as you, Timothy. But our friendship is connected on that. So we got to figure out what else we can connect with during this space. Right. So this is all part of the root. Right. So it's important to note that anytime a child acts up or there's stress is associated with it, it could be related to their environment, more than likely it is, but internally, this is what we're seeing as well as it appears online. The final thing, and I posted this yesterday, and I think it's very important and relevant for this conversation, is thinking about time. And we know that firsthand that time is the attention span of our kids varies based on their age and development. So if you have a child or if you have a session, if you run an after school program and you think that your kids are going to stay on there for 2 hours, just know that if they are 12 years old, that engagement, that actual attention span shouldn't exceed anywhere from 36 minutes. And I mentioned to the group yesterday in my session that there's an interesting realization that video games or social media, the environment changes, right? So you will notice that the scenes change, the prompts change, the challenges change. This is all by design, but just note that increasing the amount of time our kids are spending online doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be paying attention during that particular time. All right, everyone, that's enough, I promise. I'm done with you all for that. So I need you to breathe for a little bit. That's negative energy coming your way. And I think just know that that's the elephant that we're now going to try to address and to create. So take a deep breath, take out your phone, find somebody on that phone that you haven't contacted in over 6 months, someone that you really care about, because I'm going to bring that energy back, that positivity back for you all. Go scroll through your phone contacts. Don't find that old boyfriend or girlfriend or anyone else that nobody needs drama at this point in their life, but find somebody you haven't gotten in touch with. And I want you to write them a real subtle note. And that note is simply saying, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. I'm thinking about you. End of story. You don't need anything else. You don't need to kind of go off if you like. We want to acknowledge that that exists. It's getting our brains to think in a much more positive tone. I also want to model for you how simple it is to change our perspective after we are consumed with negative energy. So take a moment now to do that. And if you don't, maybe you just want to shout at your kids if you have any kids, or maybe your mom or grandmother that nearby. Just let them know you love them, and we'll take a second to do that before we embrace it. Angela, Handy, I think you and I need to go on the road together. I love that you already done that. That makes me smile. All right, you all. So let's continue on that. Feel free to continue your text as you're doing that. And if they respond back to you, like, why would you ever text me, take my name off the list? Then just know I'll give you other people you can text message, because there's a lot of people that need love at this point. So, okay. All right. Let's think about.
I texted a friend that I did the Caminos with, that we walked together for many, many cities and towns, and from France to Spain.
Linda, you're the best. You need to put your number down so we can all have a Linda in our lives. So like we need a Linda in each of our Zoom calls. So seriously,
I am in some of your lives already, but I'm going to be in yours, Jamie, also. Okay.
I'm gonna invite you over to my house in 2022. So because I need good people like that in my life, and people that have done the Camino. So mad props to you.
And you better hurry up, because I'm 62. Okay, I'll be 63 soon.
You don't look a day over 40, so it's that news die. I love it. All right, lots of love, you all. So let's figure out what we're doing about it, right? So what we're going to be doing first is identifying what the stressors look like, so we understand what our kids are going through. And I'm going to show you kind of how they appear. You might say, "Oh, I see that all the time." But we're going to start from a really young age so you can identify that, and then we're going to continue on to kind of see how this pattern shifts. The first is navigating communication. So when a kid first has their device, or they're in front of Fortnite or Minecraft, when there's communication going on, usually there's an unequal, I should say, dynamic when it comes to communication. And so what that means is someone usually will over communicate, while another person might feel kind of, they don't know what to do with that information, that tension that exists there. Think of that friend that you never really want to invite to a bar, like a dinner time, because they just talk too much. And at some point you got to be like, please be quiet, right? Think of that person. But the idea here is the child feels smothered by digital communication. And that's a challenge, I think, for kids, because they might not know how to navigate that. So that's a stressor that's associated with it. We then start to see, and again, a question for the group is asking yourself, and feel free to share this on the chat, how do you inform someone that they actually are oversharing if you don't have the tools? Beyond just saying like you're doing too much or be quiet already, right? Like, how do you ensure that you're still protecting the relationship and the communication, but you know that the child is doing a little bit too much and over communicating something? Feel free to share your thoughts on that, or unmute yourself at some point if you have a piece. The next kind of piece that we'll go through, though, is the idea of miscommunication that is then perceived as a personal attack. And about 60% of the cases that we're seeing across the country at Common Sense note kind of this. This might be something that Don says to me, and I'm like, Don, how dare you like criticize my yellow mustard hair, right? But you really like bananas, Don, and you might just say like, I really like your hair because it reminds me of the bananas, and I might perceive it as like, you know, she hates me because I have like this yellow hair going on, right? That might be some perception that's going on where I might not actually feel comfortable about myself. Therefore, you're just amplifying something that I feel insecure about. There's so many different reasons, but this is where we start to kind of see the nuance play out. The next thing then is, as then someone that's a victim of that, the reaction I get without thinking about this then leads me to actually do something to validate my own identity during that point. It might not have anything to do with Don, but I might then go back to Don and use something like YOLO, or use these anonymous apps that are out there that then purposely shame her or humiliate her as an anonymous person. So I might say, oh, Don, you know what? I might have yellow hair, but at least I don't have a red and yellow and green backdrop or whatever the thing that you have going on. And then you might be like, who actually said that to me? So we see this tension already existing, right? This back and forth going on. The dilemma in all this, the stressor is that the child obviously, because of these apps, because of YOLOs, because of Secrecy Me, because of these attachments that go on to applications like TikTok, our kids might not know who's actually saying that. So it creates a tension for them. The final thing I think, or the final two things that I think is important to note is the screenshots that our kids are taking. So being impersonated, taking an app and manipulating information based on that, or recording something during Zoom sessions. So this might look very, very interesting. And I'll give you a few pointed out. The one on the left is me with Barack and the rest of the family. A few years ago, some students faked an account for me and gave me 2,000 likes and photoshopped my face with Barack Obama. You'll notice me on the left-hand side. I'm not that short, and I don't usually wear that saggy pants, but it looked very real. And so some of my colleagues like, man, Jamie, I didn't know you knew Barack Obama. And I'm like, I didn't know, I wish I knew him, but it was a very interesting kind of concept, right? And it was in play, but these things can happen all the time. And what we're seeing now is our kids taking screenshots of facial expressions and then doing something usually with it, right? Or taking a part of the recording and then asking something with it. And what we're seeing a trend too, and this is the thing that I feel, as a father of a 5-year-old that I really worry about, is then using those images to blackmail others to share intimate images or to share a connection or to share some type of experience together. And particularly for our kids that grapple with that self sort of identity issues, it becomes a challenge for them, right? So this cycle kind of continues. So the question then becomes, and before I stop, I asked you 2 prompts. I'm going to ask you anyone to unmute themselves if they've experienced any other type of stressors online, working with kids directly, or from a policy standpoint, if they're seeing anything else come up. Feel free to add it on the chat or unmute yourself and share your insight. I'm very curious.
I have to say that for me, I had many stressors, and my children also, for me, for the lack of technology. But I am learning as I go. Thank God I have an angel beside me, Miss Eunice Navidad. I don't know if she's in this group, but Miss Eunice is a young woman who has a very good grasp of the technology. She's knowledgeable. So when the children have things happening with their technology, with their Chromebooks, they address Miss Eunice, and I address Miss Eunice too when I have problems with my computer, with my Chromebook.
Linda, I really appreciate that. You mentioned something that I really value. One is just our own, as educators, our own inability and our own insecurities related to the access that our kids are having. I hear this a lot from parents and educators. I don't know what the latest app is, Jamie. Can you give me the tips on the latest apps? And what I say to them, it has nothing to do with the apps. The apps will always change every few months or every few years. It's about how our kids are navigating that space to feel good about themselves. So you do really mention that. The other thing that I really appreciated about what your comment was is that you have a really good ally that can help to sort of bridge that gap and that connection. I wonder to what extent in the 104 folks that are in this room, we all have that, the ability to say, you know what, I had a really hard time with this student, or I had a really hard connection with my staff related to this. I need someone not only to talk to, but that can help me kind of leverage my understanding of it, right? For our kids is one thing, but as adults, I think you really point out to the need for that.
I saw
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Shalisa.
Teachers who are afraid to do breakout rooms.
Mm-hmm.
So I do college and career readiness
Mm-hmm.
at my high school. And my job primarily is to figure out post-secondary readiness for students, right? So college applications, scholarship, etc. So in our college center, when we're in person, it's a bunch of kids or students. There are a bunch of volunteers. We let them go off to the corner and kind of support. And so being in Zoom, the fear was, we don't know what type of conversations are going to happen now because it's not an open space. So it was, we need 2 or 3 people in a room with the adult and the student to be able to support that student, but that take away from what we're able to do and how many students we're able to serve.
Absolutely. And just a quick comment on just your image. I know you can't appear, you're on camera, but very stylish, good indigo, good purple color going on there. So stylish for that. If I were to ever have a dress on for Halloween or anything, I'd probably rock that, but I couldn't do your shoulder. So kudos to you on that. Good image. But I do really appreciate and value what you just finished sharing, the amount of time to scaffold this, right? Like the fear of like, I'm going to put you in a breakout room, yet I don't know what's going to happen. It's a wild west with you all, right? The parameters that we create for our students, right? And I do think there's a tension that exists, right? The first tension is I want to give you the freedom and I want to give you the space to speak like you were in a classroom, yet I know that there's some undertones happening here that we haven't really talked about. We haven't set up that space. So I could say, be respectful, be cool with one another, don't say anything mean. But unless I actually can monitor that, and unless we can model that for our kids, it becomes like a tug and pull for that goes on, right? So I think the key in all of this is, are our kids understanding the need for their own space to be validated, right? Are they understanding that they have a voice in this? And two, are they understanding that when there's tension that there's likely going to be because they're trying to navigate their relationships in these spaces, do they know what to do in those cases? Not to self-regulate, but to understand what the pathway of connection and resolving something is. And that's where I feel like there's an opportunity for us that you really spotted on, right? But again, I want to name the fact that you're absolutely right. It takes a lot of time to create this and it hinders our ability to kind of teach something. So kudos to you on that.
The other stressor is because again, working with seniors primarily for the college app season, is they feel so overwhelmed because this is new that they've decided to kind of shut down and not deal with what's going on. Mm-hmm. And it's hard because you want them to apply and have all of these opportunities, you know, that they so rightfully to take advantage of, but they went from being not working to essential workers, working a couple of hours to essential workers, you know, being the ones to carry their household, now trying to graduate high school, then they're trying to figure out if they want to go to college. And so one of the feedbacks we got from students through our survey from 9th through 12th grade was, there's too many emails being sent to me. There's too many people contacting me. And so it's like, how do you, first we need to know that you're okay, right? So the only way to know if you're okay is we have to contact you. But then the second thing is, are we overwhelming them to a point to where they are going to shut down on us, and us giving them the resources we want them to have and that they need is now going to go on deaf ears because they don't know how to have a healthy outlet to say, let me just decompress all this information for a moment and then get back to you.
Absolutely. Like 100%. 100% what you just said. I'm so spot on. The feedback loop that you just talked about, you know, like I'm bombarded with messages as an adult. You know, I got parents from the school. I want to know that my child's taking a survey. Now there's a reading assessment going on as a parent, right? And then I have to do that as in my role to kind of start to connect educators or even students. And so for our kids, it's difficult to decipher, as you pointed out, like, does this right or not, right? That creates a sense of apathy. So spot on. Like, I really love that comment. So teaching our kids when there's too much information, teaching our parents how to decipher the information that's in front of us, right? And then how to actually say, you know what, too much, right? Heidi Reed, I got too many emails from you this week. I love you and I respect the fact that you're trying to support me, but right now it's too much, right? And as adults to say, okay, we got to clear and reset our cadence about how we connect with our kids. That's a spot on. And please let me know when you want to take this on the road together, Jalissa, because I could certainly use a co-facilitator. You're spot on with your assessments on that. Last thing before we start, and I know we're going to talk about this around turning on or turning off your camera and the need for our kids. I want to just quickly make a note about this, that the validation, the time it takes for our kids to produce something is very real for them. As they get older, particularly starting in 6th grade, we're starting to see a tension that arises between what I'm going to look like in front of the camera and how I'm going to curate that. So think of an actor, an actress auditioning for something, the lines that they practice. A really good question to ask our kids, particularly that age group, is to say, how many takes does it take you to edit your TikTok video? And if they say, I do that really quick, like in 10 seconds, we know that's a really good indicator that they're okay and they're comfortable in their spaces. But if they say, you know, sometimes I edit for hours a quick video, that tells me I need to scale back on the engagement that I might have if I work directly with kids, right? So these subtle questions tell me a little bit about what our kids are doing to navigate. What I highly would not recommend if you're an educator on the call today, because there's a real tension again that exists. I wouldn't create behavioral mechanisms for turning on and off your camera. That is one way that to create tension in your students very quickly. So I might say, Jose Duenas, I know you're going to turn your camera off, but before this call's over, I'm going to ask you if you and I can see each other for about 10 seconds, because I need to know that you're alive and I need to smile at you because I really respect how you look, have that stylish pose, right? And then so Jose feels like, you know what, I feel pretty connected with him. I'm going to do that. And that's the extent of our connection. And then the next time Jose's up, and I'm going to say, you know what, Jose, can you do me a favor? Can you turn your camera off for about 10 seconds this time? And what I'm going to ask you to do when you turn your camera on is I'm going to ask you to ask a question for the rest of the group. You know what, you're already on the camera for 12 seconds. Can you do me a favor and turn your camera off? So it validates Jose's presence if he's not online at that, right? And I like that. And I like exactly like Dr. Ginward had mentioned, right? We want to scaffold the experience to validate the child's experience using the positive traits or using the asset or using a positive perspective when it comes down to that. All right, let's move on because I've digressed. Is there any last questions or any comments that I have not shared with you all that you need to just like, Jamie, address this before we continue?
So there was one thing in the chat, Jamie,
course.
in regards to Zoom bombers. Having Zoom bombers sit during a rosary and assembly on sexual assault and race comment during a class. So just kind of running into that issue of and that stress of Zoom bombers.
Certainly. We'll talk about that. I'll talk about that very briefly because I think the fear of having an unknown person come in, both as parents or administrators, leads us to over control the situation rather than normalize that there are some interesting people out there that want to disrupt the sanctity or the connection that we have going on in this space. So here's sort of the take that I'd have. Over controlling, creating parameters is a good thing, right? Not the over control piece, but the creating parameters piece. Like we want to make sure that our kids are safe. So let's create the right safe measures, safeguards that you can have that. And I could teach you some of that stuff, but I don't want you to get stuck on that because it's not worthwhile. Another approach would simply be at the start of this call, I'm going to recognize that if someone shows up and shows their butt cheeks or says something that counters to the connection that we have, here's what we're going to actually do together. Number one, we're going to ignore the person. Number two, it's going to be a little awkward for a little bit and we're going to talk about after what happened. And number three, we're not going to validate that person's existence at this point because they disrespected this particular space. We will then find out on the back channel to ensure that our kids are protected, but we will find out on the back channel who did it, who didn't, or how to protect ourselves in the future. But we're not going to overextend because we don't want to overreact, thereby giving more fodder to Zoom bombers in the future. That's kind of what we're trying to get into. Obviously, you have to deal with all the ripple effects and the ramifications that come with it. Parents complaining, saying, what the heck happened? But we want to make sure that we create those parameters again. There are going to be instances where we might have outsiders in our system. This is our approach to address that. And when they do, this is our approach to deal with it and confront it head on and then move on, right? We don't want to kind of provide that sense. But again, I digress, but those are some tips. And at the end of the call, I'll share my email if that's something you grapple with. I can share a one-pager about how to control your Zoom settings or whatnot related to that. Great questions. All right, let's get back to this session so we can figure out what do we do about it. We're going to go through this fairly quickly, but I'm going to give you guys some chance to do that. The very first thing I'm going to ask you to do is if you are in a position where you're looking at your policies and you're on a position where you are addressing student policies, the number one thing I'm going to ask you to do is revise, reflect, check on your student privacies. What exactly does the statement say about your student privacy? And I'm going to give you a few tips on how to do that. The first thing you want to try to do is you want to always make sure that whatever child is in the background, there's no other information that's being shared with it. So if Elizabeth Cole's in the background has the phone number of her dad, and I might say, Elizabeth Coles, what is that number? I want to be cognizant to know for my kids when I'm in front of them to recognize that there's information that actually might be used against them. And COPPA, and again, we won't get into protection at this point. I do an entire session on student privacy, but just note that we want to be able to get our kids to understand and to name if there's any personal information that they might be used against them or have that. And it's impossible to say like, Elizabeth Coles, move that phone number away from your background. Like, I can't have her do that, but what I can simply say is, Elizabeth Coles, when I see your mom or your dad or your auntie or grandma, can you do me a favor? I'm going to ask that any other information that comes up be removed so we protect your privacy online. Does that make sense? It's sort of different, but I need you all to kind of look at your own policies. If you're like, what policies, Jamie? I don't even know anything about this. Well, now's the time to drink some water and then create one, because you need one as a whole. And I can give you a template if you all need that support. The next recommendation I'm going to give you, and again on this image, we started this process with Oakland Unified, and we started it in the Peninsula. But I would say to the question and to the comments about over messaging, from this point on, to create a one pager, just a really one page system to say, here's the things that we're thinking about as it relates to your health online. Here are the recommendations that we have for you. Here are the challenges that we're seeing, and here are the direct resources. In the case of Oakland Unified, we recently came up with a one pager for their attendance team, and they came up with just 3 areas. One is around their social emotional wellness for families and kids. So they talked about what the challenge was, what they recommended, and the resources that educators or parents alike could use to turn to. I encourage you to think about this, copy this document, use it, make a copy of it and see what your challenges are, and simplify your approach if you work directly with students. And if you don't, as a policy, work with your team to create a much more condensed, much more streamlined sets of information. Use it, please, make it your own. The last thing I'll give you, or actually I'd say the last thing, there's a few others. There is a mental health app, and I shared this in our session yesterday, but to the point that our kids are grappling with some of these issues, Common Sense has outlined a list of developmentally appropriate mental health apps that you can use. And let me be very clear that these apps don't have kids' intentions in mind. They're geared for adults, they're geared for users to continue to use. But what I would encourage you to do is take from them, take what the process is, take some of the activities and incorporate them. And if you do decide to use them, vet them thoroughly, right? Look at our site, obviously, to review them, to see what age appropriate content is there. There's a really good one that I just had for my daughter. It's called COVID Coach. And she's been asking me a lot about like vaccines and trying to like help people that have been sick. So we went to COVID Coach to kind of talk about how she can talk about these issues and talk about illness during this time. It's a great app. Again, we're not getting paid to publicize them. I just personally like them. So something to consider as that you can click on this link if you want more information. And then finally, I think we have some content related to our Wide Open Schools platform, our digital citizenship. We won't get into it, but they're free lessons. And what if you want to figure out how to, for example, address them, I would turn to the lessons on relationship and communication. We have a lot of free lessons, grade K to 12 lessons on knowing the power of words and actions for kids. If you're grappling with digital drama, there's ways that you can address it by being kind and courageous. And we have a number of lesson plans addressing that. They're very easy to use. I've also given you a list here, and I'm sorry, I'm just the teacher in me kind of comes because I hate it when someone just gives me tons and tons of information without giving me something practical. I've given you a free kind of quick activity guide. So if you work directly with kids, you can take these lessons that helps to talk about some of the issues that you may be grappling with. So take a look at this document, and the link itself addresses some of the dilemmas and stressors that we found, we spoke about earlier. I'm going to give you a quick run around of what the lessons looks like. This is an 8th grade lesson. You can easily adapt it into a 10-minute conversation, or you can extend it into a 2-day workshop. This is about responding to online hate speech. With the given turmoil of our political situation, there's just a lot of hate language. Personally, I have a hard time with it. What the lesson does is it takes kids to understand and to defining the term. And then what we do is we interview kids to talk about their experiences about how they deal with and how they grapple with hate speech. And then kids are able to have conversations. So it's a really, really great segue into both understanding the key terms, understanding what they can do about it, and then having kids. We've interviewed a number of kids throughout the country that talk about their experiences, and then they provide prompts for their kids. So, all right, let's practice. I'm done with it. Done hearing my voice. I want to hear from you all at this point. So can I get a time check? How much time do we have before our session is over?
We have about 30 minutes.
God, that was quick. That was fun. All right, let's embrace our time together. Here's what we're going to do.
Sorry, 15.
15 minutes. I was figured, man, this is a long session, everyone. We're going to practice this. I'm going to show you what we're going to do so you all can put all of this into action. I'm going to put you into groups in a second. But the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is understand sort of the cycle of connection and how things play out. The first thing we're going to do is understand that the cycle is very much dynamic, that these things happen one to the other. So when some information is there, there's usually a seeking going on. So Eunice Navidad might say, I'm scrolling through my Instagram at the moment, not to find bad information, but just to find information. I'm passively looking at that. It's late at night. This is what's happening. This is seeking. This is the content. I'm looking for something. Typically, we find something we want to react to, right? So if you scroll down your Facebook, if that's some of you are on it, or if you scroll down your Instagram, you will find something that interests you. For many of our kids, when there's tension, that's usually the time that they want to react, right? They want to respond to it, sometimes in a heart emoji, sometimes in a, you didn't say that, sometimes in a GIF, but there's a reaction period. This is the period that we want to be able to interrupt. We want to be able to understand what's actually happening. In doing so, if the reaction is positive or negative, there's usually some type of validation that goes on in this space. For our kids, the validation is what's important to them, not the reacting, but we often get those two mistaken. So understand that this is the cycle, and understand that each space along the way, we have a space as educators to disrupt that. Does this make sense? And this is what we're going to learn how to do now. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to define what you want in your kids. Remember at the very beginning, I said I wanted to validate you all. Part of that validation is my need to want to feel connection with you all, my ability to be more compassionate to folks that I know nothing about, but that's what I'm trying to do. This idea that I want to connect with you all, right? And feel a sense of compassion and curiosity towards the group. I'm going to ask you to pick, and these are just some that we've identified at Common Sense, but I'm going to ask you to pick one particular skill set that you want to focus on first and foremost, because we're going to get into groups in a second. So we're going to talk about it through this particular lens, right? So think about something that you want to share with your students. If you don't work directly with them, some term or a theme that you really resonate with you, choose one. All right. Now that you're doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to break into groups, and I'm going to give you this thing later. We are going to get in the groups, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to give you sort of the prompt so you guys can hear it, and then I'll share it in the groups. You're going to get into groups of 3, and here's the scenario. You can kind of deviate from it if you'd like. So this happened most recently, and I shared it with the group yesterday, and I think it's a great kind of example. There's a child while you're in front of the screen. A child begins to share his screen. And what happens is that when the child shares a screen on the desktop, there's an image that appeared that is counter to the rest of the group. And you can decide what you want what that image to be. I won't share that, it's irrelevant, but it causes a reaction in the group. And most of the group then start to comment and laugh on the chat feature on the particular group. So you as the educator, or you as the person in charge, has to interrupt that. And so what we're going to do is in the group is you're going to say hello to each other, maybe stare again at each other, maybe blink a few times, smile at each other. And then you're going to talk about this prompt. And you're going to talk about it through the lens of what you would do about it to bring that child back into the group through the perspective of your SEL, the term that you use. Does this make sense, everyone? Can I get a nod to be like, I'm feeling you? Okay. All right. If I can get folks in that, we're going to do this for about 5 minutes and then come back and you can kind of respond to me. Sound good?
Can I ask one question, Jeff?
Of course, Brazil.
So is the content, are we supposed to assume that the content is like inappropriate, or it's just something that is
Inappropriate. That's a great term. It's an inappropriate. Whatever you decide. If inappropriate in your head means someone nude, then do that. If inappropriate means guns blazing, then do that. Do you? So engage on that piece. Okay. But the key is enter it through the lens of what you want your kids to see, through the lens of SEL through that. All right. I'll see you guys back in about 5 minutes from now. Okay. You're amazing. Thanks a lot. This has been easy enough. I think we'll close off fairly quickly at this point. So.
Yeah, I'm glad it was an easy one to start with. First one of the day, not so far so good.
How many do you have left? Do we have one more session?
Just one more session. Yeah.
And so remind me again, you want to put in the survey at 10:40, is that correct?
So I'll put the link to the survey in the chat.
Okay.
And then everybody can just kind of fill that out before they head off to their next session.
Beautiful. And this next session starts at what time again? 10:45?
The next one starts there's a 15-minute break, so the next session's at 11.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Are you doing an 11 o'clock workshop also?
You know what? I'm done at this point. So I think I've done I've done 3, and it's been fun. It's been a fun thing, but I'm pretty bombarded at this point. So
yeah, I bet.
And remind me, are you part of the county office, or where are you at? Rebecca?
Well, I'm with a county office. I'm up in Solano.
Solano, you and I need to get in touch because I'd love to work with your county. So